Hello everyone, welcome to the Hindu analysis for 9th February 2021. Let us get into the first article. 171 still missing as death toll in Himalayan tragedy rises to 26. So the death toll in the Nanda Devi deluge in Uttarakhand's Chamoli district went up to 26. Yesterday there was 17 or 15. Now it has officially been announced as 26 people lost their lives in yesterday's tragedy. As of now, 171 persons are still missing and the search is going on, conducted by the ITBP personnel. The rescue operations are going on for 24 hours without any loss of time. ITBP personnel were roped in to provide relief material and food material to the villages that lost connectivity due to damages to bridge in the deluge. So there were 9 villages that were stranded due to their bridge connecting to the mainland was cut off. So ITBP personnel, though they were carrying rescue operations at the dam sites, along with it they were also providing relief materials to the villages which lost connectivity. So the central government ordered a probe into what were the issues that resulted in this tragedy. Accordingly, a team of DRDO's Snow and Avalanche Study Establishment scientists have been flown into Joshimath for surveillance and reconnaissance. Along with them, Indian Space Research Organization scientists are also conducting a comprehensive analysis of the disaster. So these two agencies are the flagship agencies pertaining to studying the terrain of that entire region. So the scientists who have been studying the region and have been monitoring the region for the past few decades have been asked to ascertain the reasons as to why this mishap occurred. Coming to the next article, no glacial lake found, landslip likely trigger, experts. Glaciologists and experts in rock sciences are converging on the view that the cause of the Chamoli deluge was most probably a landslip and not a glacial lake outburst as thought earlier. So to refresh our knowledge on what is a glacial lake burst, a glacial lake outburst flooding GLOF occurs when a breach in the glacial lake causes a sudden surge in downstream. So such lakes are formed when glaciers erode land, melt and over time become a large mass of water in the depression formed. And these can be breached causing a flood downstream. That is what has happened in the Uttarakhand case. The images or the footage that we have been seeing for the past 2 days point out to that there might have been a glacial lake outburst flooding. But now scientists, after studying large amounts of data including satellite imagery, have concluded that it might be unlikely. So it might be a factor in that, but not entirely. They have concluded that the reason that this has happened is due to a landslide, not a glacial lake outburst. What is the current situation in the Uttarakhand right now? So based on analysis of satellite images, they have failed to spot any such lakes in existence. Again, strengthening their theory that this might not be a glacial lake outburst, again pointing to the theory of landslide. Satellite images also did not show any lakes. The Central Water Commission monitors and prepares monthly reports on the state of glacial lakes and water bodies measuring 10 hectares and above via satellites. So, the Central Water Commission is the nodal agency for maintaining and studying the geological changes and keeping a tab on such glacial lakes and water bodies in the region. According to them, they did not notice or their satellite images did not pick up any such glacial lakes existing in the region where this mishap has occurred. Now, to ascertain the reasons, the commission constituted a team of experts on Monday to investigate the deluge. As I said earlier, satellite data observations showed that until February 6th, there was significant snow, but the cover appears to have significantly reduced the next day. Till February 6th, whatever the satellite imagery data that they had showed a significant coverage of snowfall, meaning the area was covered with huge quantities of snow. But the very next day, when the satellite images were compared to that of the previous day, the amount of snow cover was significantly reduced. Now, they are trying to find out reason why there was a sudden decrease in the snow cover in the region. So what are the challenges faced by the scientists to find out the reasons here? So the winter season would make it extremely hard, and the ensuing damage to connect roadways makes access difficult to reach the glacier. The deluge destroyed not only the dams but also connecting bridges in the path of it. The only way they can travel through has been cut off to the glaciers due to the same deluge. Now they have to wait till connectivity is improved to go there and study from ground zero. Again, the Central Water Commission has also constituted a team of 5 member scientists who are on their way to Joshimath, close to the spot, for further studies. This is where the situation in Uttarakhand stands. 1. The reason has been ascertained that it is due to landslide, not a glacial lake outburst. ITBP personnel are carrying out 24-hour rescue operations to rescue the 171 missing persons in the deluge from the dam areas. Along with it, they are also providing relief material to 9 villages that have lost connectivity due to damages to the bridge. Research scientists from ISRO, DRDO and Central Water Commission (CWC) have also sent teams to Joshimath. DRDO and ISRO will provide reconnaissance and intelligence services to the rescue personnel. CWC commission or the member scientists committee will ascertain the details as to why this deluge has happened. That is the current status of the Uttarakhand tragedy. Coming to the next article, Centre still open to talks with farmers, says Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday said his government was still open to talks with farmers, demanding a repeal of the 3 farm laws passed last September. This is in development to whatever has happened past 26th January. He said the minimum support price for crops was eased and would remain in force. Whatever the stand that the government has taken in the past, that they are not going to do away with the MSP concept, still applies today. That is what he is trying to say here. Mr. Modi added that the calling the Sikh community names was not doing any good to the country. January 26th, violence has taken place. There has been a lot of blame that has been passing around, blaming a particular community of our country for the violence that has happened that day. He is saying that name calling of that community will never help in healing the wounds. That comparing the farm laws with the Green Revolution, Mr. Modi said there had been a huge outcry in the country even then. He is posing a comparison between the Green Revolution that has taken place to the new farm laws by saying that even though this Green Revolution has made our country into a surplus food grain country, even then, the day these farm laws, this Green Revolution concept was introduced, there was a lot of pushback from the community then also. But look how helpful the Green Revolution has been to our country. He is drawing comparison to our Green Revolution to the new 3 farm laws. He also said that protest is your right, but I want to request that you should ask the elderly farmers who are sitting there to go home. We should give these farm laws an opportunity and see if they benefit you. If there is any lacks in that, we will fix it. That is what he is trying to reassure the farmers, that whatever the challenges, your questions or challenges that you might have on the farm laws, we will try to address them. This is a clear-cut statement from the highest office or the highest authority in India, saying that we are ready to negotiate terms with the farmers, but repeal is out of question. Coming to the next article, the long and the short of India's Naypyidaw dilemma. This is in the evolving situation in Myanmar, in particularly relations between India and Myanmar. So let us understand the ground realities of what is going on in Myanmar first. So the long lingering power struggle in Naypyidaw has finally ended and the Myanmar military has won. Since Myanmar moved from a military dictatorship to a democratic leadership, there has been a constant power struggle between the military group and the democratically elected legislature. That power struggle has finally concluded with Myanmar military junta taking over reins in Myanmar. So the future of Myanmar's democracy is clearly uncertain. There is no saying when the transition, if and when, will ever take place in Myanmar, where it will go back to a democratic country. But the country sandwiched between two powerful states competing for power and influence is certain to be a key piece of region's geopolitics. Clearly, the people of Myanmar wanted democratically elected government, but the military is far more powerful than the democratically elected government, because when the transition from the military to the democratic path was being forged in the negotiations, the military ensured that majority of the power structure of the country remained in the hands of the military in itself, weakening the democratic structures that were being built or structured during the transition process. Now, whatever the seeds that were sowed by the military in that transition phase have come to fruition, because again the military is back in power, pushing out the democratically elected government in Myanmar. Now comes the problem for New Delhi. New Delhi would need to be nimble-footed and creative in its response with well thought out strategic choices, taking precedence over knee-jerk reactions. Henceforth, whatever the statements, whatever the actions that Indian government or the foreign ministry is going to make or take must be well thought out and studied in long-term perspective than a short-term perspective. Because as we have discussed in earlier classes, the relationship between Myanmar and India is very complicated and very critical in maintaining our security, border security, particularly in the northeastern region. They have been the military junta, which was power till the democratically elected NLD came to power. They were very helpful in curbing the external or extremist activities in the northeastern states, because they actively engaged with our military, both in terms of sharing their intelligence, sharing their resources, so that our military personnel can cross into Myanmar and take out terrorist camps. So the military played a critical role in ensuring that the northeastern states experiencing extremist activities was reduced significantly because of the help from the Myanmar military, particularly the junta, which we negotiated till a democratically elected government was restored into power. So now what is the situation there? If Myanmar's democracy prior to February 21 coup was inadequate and intolerant towards minorities, its political future will be a lot more complicated, making the choices of outside powers far more constrained. Here they are talking about the Rohingya issue. One of the major criticism of the military dictatorship in Myanmar was their intolerance towards minorities. Now we can clearly say that with authority that if we thought the previous prosecution of minorities in Myanmar was bad, we can only hope it is going to be far more worse than what we thought earlier, because it is more now Myanmar military dictatorship will act with more impunity, seeing that the foreign countries cannot do anything regarding in terms of imposing sanctions or whatnot, because again in the previous articles we discussed that Myanmar is no longer dependent on imports or exports to Western nations. Whatever the business that they have been doing in terms of exports and imports have only been relegated to Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore and China and India. So those strong reactions and the threat of sanctions from United States and the West in the wake of the recent coup could lead to unique political realignments in Myanmar. So what are they talking about here is, when the Rohingya issue came up, when Rohingyas were being hunted by the military of Myanmar, Miss Suki, who was the poster child for the country in terms of peace and stability, who was standing up for human rights of common people, who won global Nobel Peace Prize for her protests in terms of restoring democracy in Myanmar, suddenly became a bad person, because she couldn't do anything in the Rohingyas case, because when the military was actively hunting and burning villages of Rohingyas, Miss Suki, who was supposed to stand up for the rights of the people, indirectly supported the military actions. Whatever the reasons, we don't know why she did this, we don't know. But at the end of the day, her actions supported the military stand in the minorities prosecution. Immediately, the Nobel Prize was withdrawn. She was blacklisted from the international community. Now, this stand by the West that Miss Suki is no longer a good person, she is a bad person, will have to be changed, or a shift has to take place, because the military is back in power. There is no other person in Myanmar right now who is capable or who is charismatic enough to bring back, or at least try to bring back, Myanmar from a military dictatorship to a democratic country. So that is what this realignment talks about. Till yesterday, she was the enemy of the West. Today, she is the only hope for the West to bring back Myanmar from a military dictatorship back to democracy. She will now be the poster girl for international campaign to restore democracy in Myanmar again. As I said earlier, the case against Myanmar's conduct during her government's tenure at the International Court of Justice will most likely be put on back burner or completely forgotten, because the status quo has changed. She's the only way, or she's the only person who is capable enough currently residing in Myanmar to restore democracy in the country, hedging or challenging the power of military junta there. So this coup seems to suit no one except the military junta of the Myanmar. So nobody is getting anything out of this coup except the military and the other case, China. However, the international community's sharp reaction will likely force the military to turn towards China. Again, China comes into play, where whenever the West is saying something, the Chinese government is deemed to say the opposite, and if the West is saying military is bad, China is going to say military is good. For China, the coup has complicated its larger geopolitical economic plans in Myanmar. Ms. Suki, who was keen on a strong relationship with China, giving the growing criticism she was facing from the West, to an extent that China was almost in negotiations with Ms. Suki to take their relationship to the next level. To that extent, China will be its biggest beneficiary of February coup by default, because China will deal with anybody in anything as long as their agenda is being furthered here. China therefore has every reason to go easy on the junta and offer them support in return for increasing the Chinese footprint in the country. This military, which has traditionally been an ardent fan of Beijing, they were never a part of the Chinese influence or the nexus of the Chinese, because the military junta, when it was in its heyday, meaning when they were at the highest peak of power, then also they rejected the Chinese advances into their territory. They clearly stated that you Chinese, please keep out of our internal matters. But since the transition took place, there has been a softening in stance, because the military junta, in its way to survive, latched onto the Chinese feeding machine. Now again, when the military is back in power, the relationship that they have maintained since the transition took place and earlier on is going to be further strengthened as long as the West is going to impose sanctions on Myanmar, because Chinese is the only way out for them to come out of any economic sanctions that West imposes on Myanmar. Directly, the Western countries are forcing Myanmar into the hands of China. That is as clear as a day can be. But in reality, the military dictatorship or the military generals in Myanmar do not want to deal with China, because they know they cannot trust China at any given point of time. They would actually be very happy not to deal with China and be on their own. But here, by imposing sanctions and saying very rhetorically based charged things against Myanmar, they are forcing Myanmar into the hands of China. That is what has happened with Ms. Suki also. She was very opposed to the Chinese influence into the domestic or internal matters of Myanmar. But when the Rohingya issue took place and she was forced that She was being her country was being dragged into the International Court of Justice, and there were sanctions being imposed on Myanmar in Rohingya issue. She had no other option but to seek the help of the Chinese government. Now the New Delhi's quandary. New Delhi faces the most challenging dilemma on how to respond to the military coup in Myanmar. The dual power centers of the military and the civilian government that existed in the capital until recently situated New Delhi quite well, as it did not have to worry about hurting the international community's normative concerns or sacrificing its national interests while engaging both of them. Since a civilian government was instilled in power in Myanmar, Indian government has been negotiating with the military leadership and the civilian government. Whatever trade was happening, it was happening between the military and the civilian government's blessings. We were maintaining actually good relationship with the military, all while maintaining a cordial relationship with the government in power also. Meaning we were very comfortable, and things were looking on up and up, where we were talking about starting a new joint venture where we were trying to sell our military goods, meaning whatever missiles or tanks or helicopters that were being manufactured in India, to Myanmar's military leadership, so that we can strengthen further cooperations in the Indo-Pacific region. New Delhi Myanmar policy was not shaped by difficult choices but norms and interests. It was not our choice to be like that. We were forced because of ground realities. We were fighting with extremists in the northeastern states. They were attacking us. They were transgressing into international border by going into Myanmar, and our security forces could not pursue them because we had no formal agreements of crossing the border or security forces going in there and taking action there. But over a prolonged period of time, we gained enough trust with the military dictatorship or the military junta of Myanmar that they started allowing our soldiers to enter the international border of Myanmar and pursue the extremists that were hiding in the forests of Myanmar. Now that is a ground reality that India has to be well aware, because the moment the influence of China increases in Myanmar, there is no telling on the implications of border security of India in the international border between Myanmar and India. Neither was Ms. Suu Kyi political experiment without its fault, nor was India's national interest hurt by the military junta there. While India's national interests under the new circumstances would clearly lie in dealing with whoever is in power in Myanmar, India would find it difficult to openly support the junta given the strong Western and American reactions. New Delhi's Myanmar policy will therefore be a function of interests rather than norms. So, our foreign policy in terms of Myanmar is going to be driven by our own interests rather than the norms set by the Western or American countries. Because at the end of the day, we need to secure our own border and we need to secure our national interests. So what is the way forward here? When you look at the broader picture, irrespective of the person who is in power there, whether it may be a military dictatorship, whether it may be a civilian government democratically elected, we have to maintain a warm relationships with either of those, whoever is in power, because again, at the core of it, our national interest is of utmost importance. Meaning, we have to ensure free supply of goods, we have to negotiate contracts with whoever is in power, and we have to see that there is an exchange of trade, commerce and communication between both the countries. That is how you come out of this with a positive note. Coming to the next article, private hospitals await nod for vaccination. So, private hospitals across India say that they are all set to join hands to provide COVID-19 vaccination for the vulnerable population. But they are waiting the green signal from the union government, which the government hasn't given so far. Private hospitals plan to use technology in tracking vaccination processes and enrollment for the vaccine. Like the government, how government is using the CoWIN platform, private hospitals have also developed their own platform like CoWIN, which will help in patients registering and tracking their vaccination process voluntarily. The private hospitals are not depending on the services provided by the government. They have built their own services to track vaccinations and enrollment process also. Technology will yet again play a large role in ensuring that all citizens have access to the vaccine and how it will be administered and prioritized. Now they are waiting for the government green signal. They have built the capacities, they have launched their own platforms to track vaccinations. Now they are waiting for the green signal. If and when they get the green light, again the government must pass directives as to which vaccines must be used. Now if they get green light from the government for, to go ahead and start vaccination process, again the government must come in and say which vaccine should be given where. So entirely the private vaccine ecosystem is in the hands of central government, and private hospitals are eagerly waiting for the green signal from the government in the both the aspects, for them to start their own processes or vaccination centers. Coming to the next article, VK Singh's statement on LAC, unwitting conversions, China. So retired General Mr. VK Singh said the border has never been demarcated, and while China has transgressed across LAC up to its perception, India has done the same, but government did not announce it. So what he is saying here is the international border between China and India is not demarcated. Both the countries maintain a perception as to where their border is. Chinese Foreign Ministry on Monday pointed to this statement as confirming frequent acts of trespass by India. Its spokesperson said this is an unwitting confession by Indian side. This is nothing but a rhetoric from the Chinese media and the Chinese Foreign Ministry. They did the same thing last year, where Chinese official made similar seized remarks on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's comment at an all-party meeting, saying that nobody has intruded. This can be construed as a method or a way to justify the actions taken by the PLA. This is nothing more than rhetoric or mental games that are being played by Chinese on Indian side. Coming to the next article, Sri Lanka clears Chinese energy product 50 kilometers off the coast of Tamil Nadu. So a week before reneging on the 2019 Colombo Port Terminal Agreement, the ETC agreement, Sri Lanka cleared a Chinese energy project in three islands of Jaffna Peninsula that are barely 50 kilometers from the Tamil Nadu coast. This comes at a time when the Sri Lankan cabinet reneged their agreement with the Indian and Chinese governments on the building of the eastern terminal there. While this was being done simultaneously, when they were cancelling the agreement with the Indian and the Chinese governments, they have went ahead with an energy agreement with the Chinese. This changes a little bit of status quo in terms of relations between India and Sri Lanka, because at the onset of the new government in Sri Lanka, they were very cordial and said that whatever has happened has happened. We are going to ensure an India first foreign policy. But the actions taken here recently does not indicate or does not show an India first foreign policy, because while tracking back or while pulling out of an agreement between India and Japan, they went ahead with an agreement with China. This changes few things. So on January 18, the cabinet approved proposal to involve a Chinese company to install hybrid renewable energy systems in 3 islands off the coast of Jaffna in Palm Bay. These 3 islands are sparsely populated. Most of the population are refugees who ran from those islands to Tamil Nadu during the civil war that has taken place in Sri Lanka, mostly habitated by Tamils there, and these 3 islands are very close to Tamil Nadu coast and are military installations there. Now the question comes, if they are building an energy project, meaning any project, energy project there, it puts India's security in a compromising position due to the proximity between Indian shore and the energy project being built by the Chinese there. Though India has not commented on the development, but sources in Colombo said that concerns were raised, citing the project's site's proximity to the Indian coastlines. Delft Island is one of the closest points to India from northern Sri Lanka. This is where the construction of the project is going to take place. We have to wait a little longer how India is going to react to these new construction projects. Coming to the next article, enhance combat readiness, Xi tells People Liberation Army. So, Chinese President Xi Jinping urged the Chinese military to enhance combat readiness as he inspected a People's Liberation Army Air Force division ahead of a major national holiday in China. The major national holiday that we are talking about here is the Lunar Festival that happens annually, and it is the biggest festival in China. The Lunar Festival is the biggest festival in China. A media affiliated to the PLA also reported earlier this month a border defense company at Karakoram Mountains at an elevation of 5,380 meters had been equipped for long-term winter deployment. Again, as we discussed in the previous article, the Chinese have been capacity building in the border areas. They have been deploying tanks, they have been constructing all-weather infrastructure in the high altitude region to support their troops. As I said earlier, China has been building new heliports and conducting large-scale maneuvers at high altitudes to acclimatize their soldiers at that temperatures and that low oxygen heights. This capacity building is not only confined to the Chinese side, we have also been building our infrastructure there. Coming to the next article, panel slams Department of Telecommunications for delay in 5G trials. A parliamentary committee said that India is unprepared for a rollout or partial deployment of 5G technology, and it is only possible by the end of 2021, or the deployment can take place only as early as 2022. So the parliamentary committee or panel slammed the government for its laid-back approach in conducting 5G trials, and they said that in a report that has been submitted to Parliament on Monday, the committee was headed by Shashi Tharoor, a Congress MP from Thiruvananthapuram, stated that the 5G trials or the expectation of deployment of our 5G can happen only at the earliest can only happen at the end of 2021 or early 22. So they were saying that there is undeniably long delays in auctioning of spectrum, and the recommendations on spectrum auction is also being set aside by the government there. So he also said that fundamental differences between the versions of the telecos and TRAI on fixing of spectrum prices, and the committee also urged that both these, that is the private companies which want to buy the spectrum and the TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, must come to a single page on how the prices is going to be and what the auction process is going to be in order to ensure a speedy rollout of 5G technologies and 5G services in India. Thank you. Have a good day.